piece that I have in the show is Mappa Mundi, which is a reference to medieval world maps that conflated real and imaginary geography. And for those of you who are familiar with what I do, I make maps. I do work about maps. And I use this very kind of traditional authoritative form of maps, partly because it's so familiar to people and it kind of draws them in. It's something that kind of is very attractive to a lot of people, and then so I can use it and kind of unpack it and create a kind of critical cartography. And my recent work is focused on popular representations of the world, namely the first one being the world map. Which for me is one of the oldest design objects in the world. It's existed in the same form practically for centuries, and but as a representation of the world, a true representation, is highly problematic. A map is a 2D object, and so that requires a translation of the spherical world onto a flat plane, so that's a kind of mathematical problem. But when you think about the content of the world map, you're translating the political world into a flat surface and a very reductive one, and that's an ideological problem. So Mappa Mundi, this rearranges the world map so that it conveys a different kind of politics than what is suggested by geography alone. But it still has a symbolic value of the world map and its familiarity of the nation shapes and how they're culturally understood. Along with the world map, another popular representation of the world that I'm interested in is World's Fairs, or international expos. So for those of you who weren't around in the mid-'80s when the last one occurred in the United States, in New Orleans actually, these are mega events, and they're spectacles of culture and commerce. They occurred in the US until 1984, and now they mostly happen in Europe and more recently in Asia. So during the World's Fairs, global geography is displaced onto a local map. In a past era before cheap air travel and electronic media, these were events that were one of the ways that people were able to kind of experience the world and just sort of, or consume it in a way, sort of armchair tourism. Although there's a lot of walking when you're in the World's Fairs. So in World's Fairs, ideas of progress and the future are invoked heavily. Nations and corporations represent themselves with spectacular architecture and displays of industrial, commercial, human innovation. And until the 50s, it was common to represent mostly Asians and Africans via ethnographic displays of people in native villages, which were usually in sideshow areas. And it's interesting because there is still some of that kind of idea of looking at the other that exists in contemporary fairs, even though it's a lot more subtle. But for me, to bring these two things together, the World's Fair and the world map, I read the World's Fairs as a kind of rearranged world map. So if you look at the site plans of World's Fairs, they're markers of the kind of political situation of the time. In the hierarchy of how national and corporate pavilions are placed, who's represented, who's not, who's next to each other. So this is just a drawing showing the 1964 World's Fair in New York with the placement of the pavilions turned into nation shapes. So think about the kind of political relationships that this map suggests. Something else that interests me about World's Fairs is the development of the fair site, because these are very big places, and often in the past the area was created by landfilling, but they've also been used to leverage urban renewal, very sometimes heavy-handed tactics, which is what you see in Shanghai. I'm just going to take you, actually I think I'll just skip right to China. I was going to take you on a little, let's just say this for a second. So what this map is doing is it's using two World's Fairs, the San Francisco World's Fair in 1915 and this location of the Shanghai World's Fair, as kind of anchor points to talk about larger global economies. And so the reordering of the map is based on processes of globalization, specifically with a narrative about shipping and sovereignty, displacement, and commerce. So I'm just going to skip through, because we only have 10 minutes. There's this time of the end, I'll go back. So these are just the, well, okay, why tease you? I'll just tell you what they are very quickly. San Francisco, site of the 1915 World's Fair, celebrating the completion of the Panama Canal, and it put San Francisco on the map as a port city. This is the Port of Oakland, west of San Francisco. It's the 5th largest container port in the U.S. It used to be a much more important positioning port in a shipbuilding area. And now, because a lot of port cities in the U.S. and elsewhere, a lot of this activity has moved to Asia. So, like a lot of port cities and waterfronts, the industrial areas have been replaced by residential areas. They've been gentrified. And there's always a conflict there. Here's an aerial view of the port. Panama, the Panama Canal in the middle, sort of a shortcut from Atlantic to Pacific, and for me, one of the key points in the kind of history of globalization, because it really revolutionized shipping and transportation. It was very strategic militarily for the U.S. And of course, the Canal Zone is famous as a sovereign territory that completely bisected the nation of Panama. It basically was the United States of America for about 90 years. Very interesting kind of history. An aerial view of the mothball fleet in the San Francisco Bay, Suisun Bay near San Francisco. The kind of end story of globalization is what happens to ships when they die. They go into storage, and then a lot of them get towed to South Asia, to Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, where they get broken up and recycled under extremely bad labor conditions, which is also the part of the story of globalization, which is exploitative labor. So, but what I really want to talk about is China and Expo 2010. So we're going to zoom in on the East Coast and look at Shanghai. Two things about China. One, it's the second largest shipbuilding nation in the world, and it's trying very hard to become the first. And number two, that this year is the Expo 2010. So in Shanghai, off the coast, there's an island where all of the shipbuilding activity in the region is being moved to. That's the little pane on the right corner, and then the pane on the left corner is the Jiangnan shipyard, which is a historic shipyard. It's been there since 1865, and there it is circled. This is zooming in. This is the Huangpu River, and so this shipyard. This is also the site of the expo. What you're looking at right here. So this was a shipyard on the north side of the river. On the south side, there's a Krupp steel factory and a lot of steel production, and a couple of little villages with about 20,000 people. This is a photo from November 2000, and there's the shipyard circled. And then this is a photo from 2002. So this is from July. In December, the expo was awarded to Shanghai in a bid process similar to the Olympics. And this was also around the time that the Shanghai government completed their plan for the entire river. So the expo site, which was originally supposed to go near the airport, was in that time, around that time, sited here. So this is right before the expo bid was awarded, and what's circled up there, the square area is the steel plant, and the other kind of odd-shaped areas are all villages, and they're low-rise, hutong kind of areas. So already the government had a kind of eye on parts of the river for revitalization, because, you know, why have polluting industry in the middle of the city? You know, we might as well use the waterfront for suburban homes or something like that. So this is 2000, and you notice there's a bridge going up. This is the Lupu Bridge. So this is before the expo was awarded. This is 2004, so 2 years later the bridge is completed. And in 2005, 3 years later, only 3 years, you'll notice that all of the residential areas are raised. They're gone. So in an incredibly fast time, the people were contacted, negotiations for moving them were carried out. New buildings were built 2.5 kilometers away to house most of the people. They were relocated and the physical neighborhoods were demolished all in 3 years. That's lightning speed. There are no eminent domain lawsuits in Shanghai. And then in 2006, you can see the rest of the site is being cleared now. The bridge is completed. The steel yards are gone. The shipyard's still there. And in 2009, the new city created by the expo plan emerges and replaces the old city. And the only trace is a kind of some of the dock shapes of the shipyard have been retained as a historic area. There's some names like Jiangnan Walk, Shipyard Walk, that sort of thing. And then some of the ironies in this is that for the expo, they removed the real city and built a simulated city block in its place. And so this is an early plan for the urban best practices area, which is looking at case studies of cities like Madrid, Vancouver, etc., as a model for city planning and city building. And then within the architecture of the expo itself, which is overall a temporary city and a temporary world and a kind of reduction of the world into these monuments, temporary monuments. It's also a temporary city. Finish it? All right. So you have the Dutch, this is a picture of the Dutch pavilion under construction with traditional Dutch houses, and there's a sign on the front that says Happy Street. And that echoes the slogan of the expo, better city, better life, which I'm not sure how many people believe that. 2 more slides, maybe, I think? Okay, all right. So when I was in Shanghai last October, I interviewed a real estate developer whose company built the new apartment buildings that the people from the expo site were relocated into. And he gave me a promotional book of their project, and you can see the title. It says Unceasing Development, with a photo of a kind of suburban house, suburban-style development, Southern California style, extremely popular in China. But Unceasing Development kind of sums up to me not only what's going on in China, but also the way that international mega events like World's Fairs, Olympics, World Cup are being used as heavy-handed urban renewal tactics to remove what cities consider to be unwanted or unspectacular in neighborhoods and people. So I was going to talk about Vancouver, but I'll skip it. And I'll just leave you with these photos of the Beijing Planning Museum, where you have these incredible, room-sized models, where in Beijing, because it's such a huge, I think as big as this, the model of the city is as big as this, and the kind of new city, the newly developed city, is a model, and the rest of the city is a aerial map. It's flat. So there's a kind of border between the map and the model, between the new city and the old city, the developed city and the city left to be developed. And so the map kind of envelops you, so you can locate yourself and your history or your future. And then I'll just leave you with this. This is another version of the Mappa Mundi piece as a mural, which is also kind of enveloping, which for me, hopefully, helps you think about your place in the narrative.